Hey, what's popping to you too, man? Oh, hey everyone. Owen here. This is awkward. It looks like you can see me. You just caught me in the middle of my morning pro gamer routine. And, well, that's something we'll get to hear a little bit more about later. While I've got you here, I have actually been thinking about something recently. Specifically, something that I can't do. Now, a couple of videos ago I said I'm a bit of a gamer, and that's true, I'm not that blatant a liar. I prefer to lie by omission, and if you'll remember, I conveniently never said I was good at video games, and that was for good reason. Even though I present myself as a knockoff Scott the Woz whose main goal is to make people mad at him, I am sadly nowhere near a pro gamer. For now. I struggled with The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks. Now, in general life, this lack of skill has yet to hurt me very much and is unlikely to in most future careers. No job interviewers have asked me about it so far, at least. However, it probably has hurt my chances at internet fame, the most important thing in life, and the hobby for which that is the most true is speedrunning. Though, like most things on the internet, it began as a relatively niche hobby interest, the sport of beating video games as fast as humanly, and in some cases inhumanly, possible, has exploded over the last decade, and nowhere is that more evident than in the biannual speedrunning extravaganza Games Done Quick, both in its summer and awesome varieties. Running since 2010, each year, these events raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for charity each, and host dozens upon dozens of runs, from highly popular and anticipated games to much more niche titles. And, as it stands, things are pretty good for GDQ. Each year has been a bigger success than the last, and it's not just the donations growing, but the variety of runs, number of attendees, and even the size of the venue, too. Outside of financial success, GDQ has been known to be one of the more socially progressive and accepting spaces in gaming. However, as with nearly anything even tangentially related to video games, much less actually progressive spaces, eventually the right-wing social blowback of the Gamergate variety hit it. But I wanted to talk about this event not just because Gamergaters got mad about something they did. I don't think my role is just to report on their antics. I wanted to talk about it because I think it's a very interesting case study in the insidious ways that right-wing social politics can wind their way into seemingly innocuous discourse. Unlike a lot of previous videos I've made, where the people I discuss and respond to are, transparently or covertly, trying in some way to push such politics, and where Gamergate as a movement is clearly using certain reasons for its existence to poorly cover up the real purpose behind it, the motivations of some of our characters today are a lot more gray, and the transparency of their movement is much more ambiguous. Some of them may just be pandering to the right intentionally, some of them may not even be meaning to do it. While it's not for me to figure out exactly what their thought processes are, I think it might offer some interesting perspective on how movements can be hijacked without their participants necessarily even noticing. So, now that we're all on the same page, it's time to jump back to a simpler time, or as most people know it, 2018. On November 28, 2018, a series of posts was made to Twitter by a user named Antifa Andrea concerning a Discord server frequented by GoldenEye64 speedrunner and YouTuber R White Goose and fellow runner of various titles Graviton29. The posts alleged that this server had a general culture of casual transphobia, ableism, and sexism, as well as use of many far-right dog whistles, this culture largely created and maintained by these runners. But these weren't just allegations. Accompanying the posts were a number of screenshots, and they're pretty damning. Blatant antisemitism, such as invoking the Jewish question, sexism, and a fair helping of social Darwinism, as well as, of course, the glue that connects it all, Jordan Peterson. Pretty straightforward, right? People get nervous whenever the idea of calling someone a scary word like Nazi or fascist comes up, but I think, at least, and I hope that after all that you agree, it's not that much of a stretch to say here. R White Goose is a fascist. And while after these screenshots were posted, he attempted to walk these statements back, claiming that he no longer held those ideals, he has yet to demonstrate any actual ideological change, and the things he tried to walk back occurred only a year before his apology. It wasn't something that had happened a few decades ago, or a decade ago, or even a few years ago. If you're gonna try and tell me that this guy had some grand revelation and realized that being a Nazi was bad over just a year, you're going to have to provide some evidence that such a thing happened. And the greater the evidence to the contrary, like years of being a Nazi, the more damning that evidence is going to have to be to convince me. Though GDQ declined to take immediate action after these posts were published, under mounting pressure from the outside, they eventually followed through and banned Goose from all future events. On December 25th of that same year, the well-known speedrunning YouTuber Apollo Legend published a video on the subject, which was a pretty notable event in the controversy considering that it would easily be the largest platform to discuss it up to that point. But if any of you happen to be fact-checking me as we go, you might notice that this video doesn't exist anymore, at least in a place you can easily find it, and that's for good reason. You see, despite the massive responsibility Apollo had to represent this in at very least a complete manner, they fell short in some pretty notable ways. Now, because what's going on here is pretty much just Apollo Legend very transparently covering for a Nazi that he has financial involvement with, I'm not going to spend a massive amount of time on it, especially because YouTuber Dark Viper AU, while embroiled in a lengthy back and forth feud with Apollo, has already made a video extensively covering it. Since Apollo has kinda disappeared from the internet since the failure of Oceanside, the GDQ competitor event headed largely by Mr. Legend alongside our White Goose himself, there's not really much more to the story than Dark Viper explained in this video, so I'll just summarize it here. Essentially, Apollo takes in this video every possible opportunity to downplay the severity of the evidence against Goose, making a great effort to show the minimal number of screenshots with the most benign, though still quite bad, things Goose said. Maybe he included these because he wanted some tiny sliver of a degree of credibility, but honestly, who knows or cares? It's not fooling anyone, and Apollo only used it to move on to vague allusions to GDQ's hand being forced and calling into question the motives and character of those who argued for our White Goose's banning. Throughout this video, Apollo Legend is not only blatantly dishonest about the events he discusses, but disingenuous about his own understanding of them.
What I really want to know though, is what is the protocol for banning someone in this way? Because I can't find it anywhere in writing.
Excuse me, where is it written down that I can't be a Nazi? Is there a rule? Of course there's not a no Nazis rule, and I don't need to tell you why every business doesn't need to have one. If Apollo can't understand how social norms work, it's not really my responsibility to help him out there, and someone might also want to explain to him why GDQ also doesn't have a no pissing on the floor rule. I read the rules, nowhere does it say anything about where you are and are not allowed to piss. They have no standard for this, and there was a knee-jerk reaction. Please unban me, I swear it won't happen again. Anyway, true to form, he ends the video by suggesting everyone go subscribe to Goose and fight the hate mob, a very normal thing for someone who happens to have absolutely no well-documented financial ties to another individual to say. Now, I'm not going to sit here and talk for another 20 minutes about how I think Apollo Legend is either a Nazi apologist or a dumbass. That's all well-explored territory. But I think that this story is important because it shows how easy it is to take something independently indefensible, blend it into a broader narrative, and come out on the other side with the conversation shifted to a place where suddenly this thing has become possible to defend by extension. But what we're interested in today isn't the people who make up these narratives, it's the people who get caught in them. And Apollo's video gives us a glimpse of one very specific narrative around GDQ. So, why don't we take a closer look? First off, we're going to be looking at a video called Games Done Quick, Banned into Submission! By a guy named Glink. This video aims to cover the relatively prolific idea that GDQ has a bit of a ban problem. Now, I'm not here to talk about whether or not this is actually a prolific problem. As Dark Viper pointed out in his video, only 14 individuals have actually been banned, with only 8 of those being permanent, which is why when looking at some of the numerous videos on the subject, as we're doing today, you'll see that all of them will be drawing from a pretty limited pool of players to discuss.
You couldn't even make 2 top 10 videos about people who have been banned from GDQ, and you could literally make 2 top 10 videos about GDQ events that have happened.
But again, that's not really the concern for us here. We're interested in the weird stuff, and for that, this video does not disappoint. We start off here with this bit from an interview.
What really got me upset and into the whole, I guess, conversation was all the retweets and replies that I saw to Andrea's tweet, which was a lot of the trans community and a lot of the LGBT community in general that started replying and retweeting and saying stuff like, look how these disgusting people or whatever, speedrunning, totally unacceptable community, GDQ is an awful organization, etc., transphobic, this and that, just all these crazy things. And the first thing I thought was, hold up. Getting this situation resolved with the Graviton and Alright Goose, great. Let's do that. But immediately jumping into these crazy accusations and all this stuff about the entire speedrunning community and Games Done Quick and all this stuff was like, if you're gonna go out and complain about everybody and say, oh, everyone is awful and unaccepting, then you're just gonna get other people to not like you either. You're just separating the community more from you. So if you're saying that GDQ is an unaccepting environment, that's one thing, but then you throw out these awful words and talk about all other speedrunners and how awful they are, then you're just gonna get people to disrespect you more.
Yeah, I agree. Marginalized people speaking up for themselves is the reason why they're marginalized to begin with. What?
That's awfully interesting. I understand the desire to cover for an organization, community, and event that you like and have a strong connection with, but choosing to defend those things by victim blaming is highly questionable at best, and comes across as a justification of the issues that these people face. Using members of these communities who are perceived as too vocal about what they are facing to say, oh, it's people like this who really make people not like their group, is a very tried and true method of subjugating people. Any attempt to break out of the cycle of suppression is used as justification for that suppression.
And as you can see, Glink just nods along, which will be a theme here and can be seen in this next clip.
Either way, streamer Caleb Hart seems to be fed up with the hyper-political climate surrounding video game speedrunning, of all things.
This recent event with Goose and whatever, I don't know, it's becoming a bit, it's just becoming excessive. It used to be all about playing video games and raising money for charity. That was it. Now it's all about this, political correctness.
Again, Glink doesn't do anything to separate this from his own points or to contextualize anything that anybody else says as their own opinion. He never pushes back against any of these people and seems content with just putting these ideas out there regardless of what their implications are. Right before this clip, he even makes a weird aside about how,
despite the discriminatory nature of these Discord logs, though, an argument could be made that they were still conversations held in a private chat, and that none of it had to be related to speedrunning itself.
But what does that mean?
he says you could argue that, but never explains to what end. And this is a bit sneaky, because you don't just argue a point like that for its own sake. You're arguing it because you have a conclusion that you want to be supported. And the implied conclusion here is that Our White Goose shouldn't have been banned because the things he said weren't about speedrunning. Which is ridiculous, obviously, and I think Glink knows that, which is why he won't argue the point directly, and also why he probably doesn't really believe it anyway. But it's an interesting moment, and it's consistent with the theme we'll see more soon.
There are a couple more little moments like this in pretty quick succession, like this comment.
I want to make it clear that I respect all human rights, including trans rights, queer rights, non-binary rights. I respect people as people above all else, and you should too. I'm not going after anyone here for being trans or being queer, and I think my criticisms will reflect that. However, at the same time, unlike GDQ, I don't think that trans people, non-binary people, and queer people are above all criticism or are infallible.
Which, of course, he provides no evidence for, and this one...
For a reason that I'm sure was totally for the enjoyment of their audience and viewers, and definitely not at all to further appease the LGBTQ+ community, GDQ decided to host a full panel discussion called Setting the Record Queer,
Which, I've explained numerous times the serious issues with making the claim that a decision is made to appease a given group of people, not least because it falls into the territory of saying that anything a marginalized group likes was made to appease them and is therefore bad. It's another part of this cyclical suppression. Anything done to give people a voice is condemned as appeasement, which stigmatizes giving them a voice, and if anyone actively seeks a voice, they're at fault for their own oppression. Next up, Glink discusses someone named Proto-Magical Girl, a semi-regular GDQ attendee and host.
I do feel like there is some extra emotional fragility that comes with being in that LGBTQ+ community that isn't always necessary to have. Such as when Proto-Magical Girl revealed that they felt unsafe at GDQ in a series of tweets. Proto-Magical Girl doesn't deserve to feel unsafe or unwelcome at GDQ or any other event for that matter. But sometimes fears and anxiety aren't always well-founded. In other words, they're not always necessary. So instead of someone like Proto having to feel these unnecessary fears and anxiety all the time, if they really are unnecessary, then the solution would not be to police everyone around them and ban everyone who might upset them, which is unrealistic and doesn't solve the core problem, but rather find a way to overcome these fears, to no longer have this anxiety, and ultimately to be comfortable with themselves, which Proto and anyone else deserves to be.
So, I'm not in a position to comment on whether Proto-Magical Girl's feelings are valid or not, but I also don't think Glink is. Neither of us are them. It's unproductive to try and be detectives and argue over whether someone's anxieties are legitimate. Personally, I'm inclined to believe the validity of what someone says their feelings are. But even disregarding that issue, Glink's comment on the solution not being to police everyone around them and ban everyone who might upset them, while technically correct, is a lot like saying, but the solution isn't to jettison every GDQ attendee into space, because with both of those instances, Proto-Magical Girl isn't advocating for it, and equally isn't in a position to do anything about it, even if that's what they wanted to do. Glink seems to be trying to draw a connection here between the personal sentiments that people like Proto-Magical Girl express and the conduct of GDQ, even though they aren't the same, and in the tweet he showed, Proto-Magical Girl describes GDQ as being an antagonist to them in this situation, saying that they aren't doing enough. This would make sense if Glink was being transparent that this video is, in part, about individual people he takes issue with, but because he tries to connect it to a broad pattern of behavior from GDQ, he has to take some leaps of logic that don't really follow. We then take a pretty dramatic turn into even more weird, pointless territory, with the discussion of an attendee, importantly not remotely connected to GDQ staff, and their experience of having a panic attack and being unable to find food at AGDQ 2019. Not once in this story does Glink explain how this fits into the theme of the video, or why it was included at all. It's just there. Throughout the video, Glink repeats again and again that these anecdotes aren't about the people being discussed, that these stories aren't being used to appeal to a far-right set of sentiments, and that he means to be respectful to these people and their identities. And you know what? I believe that. Or at least, I believe that he genuinely thinks that's what he's doing. Glink does, at points, have genuinely good things to say about mental health and the role of LGBTQ+ individuals in the gaming community, but these moments are undercut pretty significantly by what can only really be described as dog whistles gesturing towards certain people just existing in the GDQ space, being deeply linked to the central problems there. Right after this bit, he mentions the fact that GDQ's mascot in 2017 was non-binary, which, again, what? Remember, this video is called GDQ Banned into Submission, but I wouldn't fault you if you had forgotten that. Even though it's mentioned 1 or 2 GDQ bans, and will go on to mention more, this isn't a video about that. Hell, it's barely a video about GDQ as an organization at least. It's a video about anecdotes. Ask yourself, if it's true that this video isn't about these people being discussed, why are these parts of the video here? In a video about the GDQ organization, what purpose does the discussion of individuals in no way affiliated with that organization or its policy serve? He goes on to mention the inclusion of pronouns next to runner names on Games Done Quick streams, again, with no explanation on the reasoning behind the inclusion of this detail. Glink just leaves it hanging there, with the implicit implication that it fits into the narrative of GDQ being bad somehow, though the connection there is left up to the viewer to figure out. Even the parts that do happen to stick closer to the video's subject are tainted by the earlier mentioned weird segments of other people's opinions played back like facts of the situation. And I may as well note that these opinions are only those of people on one side of this, and that side overlaps fairly consistently with the cultural right. The video ends on a bit of a weak note, with Glink refusing to look up a political party on Wikipedia.
A now viral tweet by Lady Alexis called out Spanish speedrunner Lulz Belheim, who was participating in a Final Fantasy VIII speedrun, because on his Twitter bio it states that he hates feminazism and because he supports a conservative economic policy.
Interesting note on that one. Conservative might be a little bit of a generous way to describe a party literally advocating for a reconquest of Spain involving the mass deportation of Muslims from the country.
While Glink makes a note in the description that actually maybe Vox might hold extremist views,
no shit.
The runner only agrees with their economic policy. And what are those, exactly? Well, largely neoliberal, actually, and while I wish you could be banned from GDQ for being a neolib, I sadly don't see that on the horizon. However, it should be noted that Spain has several other parties with economically liberal stances, so why the runner would choose the one ultra-nationalist one just for their neoliberal economics is a mystery we may never solve. And that's the end of that video, for us at least. Again, the most important thing to be thinking about here is what the significance of all of those weird little details we talked about actually is. If you've seen any of my previous videos, you know I'm typically pretty resistant towards making points off of saying who or what people might be, and that's still true here. But it's important to look at the points Glink is making, why he's making them, and who might be persuaded by these points. And while he says he's trying not to talk about politics and people, but about the conduct of GDQ, the answers to those questions say something very different. A big question this video leaves open is whether the real problem here is culture and people or the organization. If it's the organization, Glink is telling the truth. If it's the people, as this video would seem to suggest, maybe not so much. Glink actually happens to have another, much more popular video on this subject, this one called Games Done Quick, to ban everyone.
I gotta say, coming off of that last video, I was not liking my chances of getting anything informative from this. But Glink surprised me, for the first few minutes at least.
In the beginning, it is actually discussing instances that are, while anecdotal, kinda sketchy bans or shadow bans, and it is true that the number of bans being small doesn't negate that fact.
So, finally, after a video and a half, we finally figured out what the problem with GDQ is. Except, that gets immediately ruined, because of course it does.
In the latter half of this video, we hit a couple kind of weird bits. First off, it's a small thing, but Glink demonstrating a misunderstanding of how journalism works.
This Kotaku article also claimed that Private Cinnamon Bun pulled out a power strip.
Okay.
followed up by a lamentation on the terrible censorship instituted by GDQ after Twitch chat for the event was being used by many to mock a trans host.
It's what Orwell was trying to warn us about.
Going deeper into this exercise in misery, Glink starts to speculate on why there might be so many LGBTQ+ individuals at GDQ. This line of questioning is definitely going to end in a good place.
It won't.
To solve this mystery, he brings on an individual by the name of Cyberdemon, who is of the opinion that there's such a large queer presence at these events because of how accepting the community is. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, yeah, when I say it, and I don't mean that because of how sexy my voice is. Well, maybe I do. A little bit. But I mostly mean that when Cyberdemon says it, the implications that follow aren't so nice. They describe Proto-Magical Girl like this.
When you think of the most extreme kind of like SJW trans person, that's going to be Proto-Magical Girl, but she's probably even worse than that.
Which is followed by Glink asking this weird, loaded question.
Do you think that because you don't fit into that mold, you were kind of just, that's why you weren't given special treatment as well?
Oh yeah, of course. They just don't like me as a person, so they tried to get me out as soon as possible.
Just a quick thing. What preferential treatment are you talking about? Neither Glink nor Cyberdemon presented any evidence that anyone was being treated unfairly or unfairly favored by GDQ because of their LGBTQ+ identity. In fact, all Cyberdemon said was that GDQ was an accepting environment, something you would think would be a difficult thing to condemn. But this is just another example of a blurring of the line between the acceptance and presence of LGBTQ+ people and some loosely defined GDQ tyranny on their behalf. And again, while I obviously can't be sure, I don't think Glink is doing this on purpose. But the result is still the same, and honestly, my confidence that this isn't intentional is waning. In fact, I'd argue that his lack of intention here is actually far worse. At least when we're dealing with someone who is honest and open about the nature of their issues, their audience pretty much is aware of that, and if they're on board, then they are, and if not, they're not. But this blending of relatively apolitical issues in these small segments with very explicitly political undertones can get people making some connections and conclusions that they don't even necessarily know they're making. If you hit someone with a number of points about questionable GDQ bans that, in some cases, again, may be a little questionable actually, but then add both points about bans that are allegedly having political motivations and seemingly irrelevant ones about people with politics that are implied to be bad, you've created something with a bit of an ulterior meaning. If you had a video which discussed just the normal GDQ bans and the anecdotes about random attendees, it would be really transparent that the two were completely unrelated. But with the addition of the points about the political bans, no matter how tenuous the arguments may be, a connection is built between the two. You learn about the obviously questionable bans and you think, wow, that's bad, because of course you would, it's a reasonable reaction. Then you get the political bans, and while the focus still is on the bans themselves, you start to wonder if this theme, that right-wingers are being banned, means anything. And by the end, with the bits about queer individuals being too annoying, too SJW, or too demanding, you have your villain, and these two very distant ideas are connected. And, you know, I get why Glink did this. It makes for a good story. As I've said in earlier videos, it makes for a good narrative to have an identifiable group who, let's be honest, probably wasn't mega popular with this audience to begin with, to pin the blame for this on. But the fact that it was easy doesn't absolve Glink.
Taking a break from the subject of far-right radicalization, let's look at some fun stuff.
First, jumping back to the subject of Mr. Supports Ultranationalists for the Economic Policy, we have this video called Games Done Quick, parenthetically GDQ.
Thanks for the reminder.
Banned Speedrunner for wrongthink.
Orwell is rolling in his grave. Haha, sick, dude.
Oh, yeah, the problem was not being on board enough with the weirdly large amount of right-wingers who rushed to your defense. His real crime was not being enough of an awful person.
Oh, sorry. Where were we? Oh, yeah, fun stuff. How about, this video? Corruption at GDQ. Oh! God! I am intrigued.
Hello everybody, Twitch is open. As you can see, AGDQ is currently on, so we can all watch Dan's dad dancing right there. So, I'm a big gamer. Every fucking year, twice a year, I watch AGDQ in January and SGDQ in June.
Every fucking year!
Now, I've never donated to GDQ, because I don't believe in charities in general. I watch for the games. That's what I watch for. The reason I don't believe in charities is because I don't believe for a second that most charities are even real or actually do anything. And I also don't believe that we could invest literally billions of dollars into cancer research and apparently not cure anything. So it's a big load of shit. The money doesn't go anywhere. But no, since 2014, since you became corporate and SJW simultaneously, it's not about like, oh man, it's just a word, what's the big... It's the fucking principle behind it. It's the fact that I'm being forced by an SJW culture to add these things in, thus proving even further that GDQ has become just a selfish, money-making corporate fucking shit.
Wait, I thought the phrase went, get woke, go broke, not step 1, get woke, step 2, profit.
It's kind of funny how this guy is really worried about GDQ being too corporate. I guess the assumption being that as corporateness goes up, opinions they don't like also go up, because those opinions are forced on them by the capitalism gods, who are also weirdly socially progressive or something. But this policy is still a free decision. Many other companies don't do the same things, and GDQ gets a lot of heat for it from these types of people. So funnily enough, they're actually concerned with GDQ not being purely profit-driven enough.
Also, based on the intro, I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to think here that gay people being at GDQ is the same as 9/11, but rest assured, I am becoming increasingly convinced.
Proto-magical girl, another trans guy. I'm not sure if he's really trans or just a trans trender, but regardless.
Oh, calling into question whether people are really trans or not. Cool.
Many people in chat were saying, why the hell does it say he/him next to the username? Because many people who are not aware of this SJW bullshit don't even know why it's fucking written there. So, I feel bad for those people because their innocence hasn't been destroyed yet.
We must protect the fragile, underdeveloped intellects of our sweet, sweet gamers from scary gender politics. This guy talks about other adult human beings like being confronted by other people existing is going to scar them.
When your best line of argument against someone else is an argument against your own ability to process simple information, you may want to rethink that line of reasoning. Or not, it's your call, I guess.
If I was a speedrunner and I went to this sort of thing, I would be like, yeah, you could just put Matt's FTR, don't you dare put the he/him. And it's not actually for trans rights. In what way does me, a very typical straight guy, putting he/him by the username, how does that mean that I'm supporting trans people?
Normalizing asking for pronouns and not just inferring, for everyone, even people whose gender you think you can infer, is a pretty cool thing, and I think it's clear how such a thing is helpful. Putting all gender identity and expression on an equal level of normality and not acting like certain types are exceptions is something very much worth striving for, in my opinion. I was going to talk about how Apollo Legend made a weird video in which he does some hard-hitting investigative journalism, but it's really just him going on for 2 minutes proving that he didn't even skim the Wikipedia page about nonprofit financial law, so it's not even worth it, to be honest. Falling somewhat back into just general bad takes, this one back to our White Goose, we have a video by Walter Fate called AGDQ Bans Have Already Started, Our White Goose Banned. Note the implication already in the title that this is some sort of a pattern.
Who wants to put money on them saying it's a good pattern? No one? Okay.
Well, anyway, he's also a YouTuber, and if you want to know anything about GoldenEye speedrunning history, his channel is definitely the place to go.
Oh, nice. Conveniently recommending the guy's channel before mentioning the only a little bit worrying detail of him being a Nazi.
Makes sense. Also, what is it with these people in Vaporwave? Oh yeah, I remember, I get it.
This video also sets up a lot of other random bans before talking about Goose, which is still a sneaky tactic. Don't think I'm trying to minimize it, I'm just not going to show it here since we've all seen it enough times.
GDQ tried to ignore this for a while, saying they needed more evidence, but the negative publicity mounted. And that, rather than evidence, is probably the reason GDQ decided to drop these guys.
Now, this is an opinion we haven't really dealt with quite yet, being that GDQ was primarily motivated to ban Goose out of pressure from the outside rather than evidence. Now, while the evidence was obviously copious, the first half of that is, interestingly, largely correct. GDQ had initially said that they were waiting for more evidence before pressure mounted to the point that they followed through with the ban. But considering how much evidence there actually was, using this as a point in support of the idea that GDQ was acting rationally is a weird choice. What I would take away from it is that GDQ was too slow to act.
I know I've been negative throughout the video, but I don't disagree with this decision. They basically had to do this regardless of whether anyone's a Nazi.
See, this is another example of a somewhat sneaky way to skirt around calling things as they are. At no point in this video does Mr. Fate here actually present any evidence to suggest that Goose isn't a Nazi. He just kinda decides that there's some doubt there, even though there isn't.
Now, this last video is maybe one of my favorites that I've ever covered on this channel, and I know that's a bold thing to say coming off of a video about GDQ that included some questionable choice of B-roll footage, but believe me, this is on another level. It's by a guy named RealmW, and it's called The Truth Behind Why Our White Goose Was Banned from GDQ. I can't hype this up enough, let's just get into it.
Yo, what's poppin' gamers? WQ here. You already know who it is. Now make sure to subscribe, gamers, and you're gonna change your life forever. You're gonna upgrade, and you're gonna become an alpha gamer, which makes you way more alpha. Almost as alpha as me, by the way. You're getting there.
Alpha Gamer! Ah!
I think it's unfortunate, but I'm gonna talk to you guys about the truth of why it's happened. Okay, first of all, what Goose said, I don't know what he said. I'm not looking into it. I don't do politics, so that's not for me, okay? But let's talk about Games Done Quick.
Okay, this is very telling. You made a video about this guy. You can't just change the rules a few minutes in when the subject becomes too uncomfortable for you to deal with. Dr. Gamer says they are anti-politics, which, sure, I'm not even going to get into that. But if you are, then you shouldn't be making this video. If you lack the resources to basically engage with what the video is about, then don't do it. You can't make a video about how cool Ronald Reagan was if you ignore politics, because that's a pretty inherent part of who he was and his severe case of being very uncool.
Games Done Quick historically has been a organization that is very, very bent towards a certain group of people, and they pretty much always will side with this group of people.
I wonder who that might be.
One person in this group of people is actually the person who got Our White Goose banned from Games Done Quick. They actually went on a hate campaign on Twitter, and they dug up some old messages, and they got Goose banned.
Oh no, the poor Nazi is being mercilessly bullied. I wonder what this guy thinks about the Nuremberg trials.
Alright, so we just spent a half hour watching random people complain about Games Done Quick. Cool. What's the point? Even though a lot of this was just having fun and dunking on people with bad opinions, TM, I think that it teaches a couple useful lessons about how discourse can be manipulated, not only to change the points being used, but also the point of the discussion itself. Between these videos, we saw various levels of maliciousness, I think, but all of them fell into the same patterns, regardless of whether they were trying to change the conversation or not. Were they pushed by their audiences, their own underlying prejudices, their will to replicate their peers? As I say often at the end of these videos, who cares? We can all see what's happening here. There's no point in pretending it might be something different. It's an even more directed kind of hate than most contemporary anti-SJW movements have. It has much more hyper-directed venom towards its outgroup, in this case the LGBTQ+ community, in speedrunning. This not even to mention the peripheral goal of obfuscating the abhorrent beliefs and actions of people like our White Goose. That one is interesting because it's even a bit difficult to tell if any given individual was actually doing that because of a will to minimize extreme right-wing ideas, or because it was simply a means to advance the LGBTQ+ centered narrative. Defending Nazis there is just something you can tolerate as long as it helps you construct the narrative against the specific group of people you really hate at that moment. But whatever aspect of this we're talking about, the main takeaway is that no matter what someone says they mean, you should think about what they're communicating. Intentions can only take you so far, and we can't leave any room for error when dealing with these kinds of things.